Hello, today is Friday, April 17th. Welcome to episode 584 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. I'm NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson. I'm joined today by Senior Fellow Jessica Jones and Fellow Marc Raimondi. So folks, we are going to tread into dangerous territory here and talk about both politics and religion, because we have a little bit of a kerfuffle between President Trump, Vice President Vance, and Pope Leo XIV. Pope Leo XIV, of course, is the first American pope ever. He's from my hometown of Chicago. He is also, just like me, from the south side of Chicago. I feel, and he's a little bit older than I am, but I feel like we have a lot in common. I am not in his precise faith, but I'm pretty close. And so there's a lot of feels, a lot of emotions, a lot of theory, a lot of foreign policy, a lot of theology, all kind of coming together here about the war in Iran. And Pope Leo XIV had made some comments about the Trump administration and the U.S. role in the war in Iran. The Trump administration, through President Trump and Vice President Vance, has responded directly to the Pope, causing a lot of headlines and a lot of news stories. We're going to go to Marc first to put this in perspective, because shockingly, this is not the first time something like this has happened involving the pontiff, the head of the Catholic Church, which, by the way, has been around for over 2,000 years. So, Marc, why don't you kind of level set for us and give us a little perspective on the issue that we're going to discuss a little bit more in depth shortly.
Thanks, Les. And you're absolutely right. I have to admit, I was skeptical when I was told that our Fault Lines podcast was exploring the relationship between the president and the Pope. But I acknowledge now that while there's thousands, maybe millions of more relevant national security stories to explore, by researching it, you've brought new knowledge to me, which is always enlightening. This is a this has been happening for thousands of years, actually. But before getting into the specifics of the current dynamic between the Pope and Donald Trump, Pope Francis, it's important to zoom out and recognize that these tensions between political leaders and the Vatican are not new. They're reoccurring historically, whether moral authority and state, wherever we see moral authority and state power intersect this friction. You can go all the way back to the Investiture Controversy in medieval Europe, which is around 1075 to 1122 AD, where secular rulers in the church clashed over who had the authority to appoint religious leaders. That was fundamentally about sovereignty. Who governs? What are the terms? Now we fast forward a couple centuries, we see very similar dynamics. Napoleon Bonaparte, he actually at one point detained the Pope, forced him to go to his investiture. Otto von Bismarck, who pushed back against the Vatican influence during Germany's unification. Different contexts, same underlying tensions. So let's fast forward to today. What we're seeing isn't so much a personal dispute as it is a reflection between two very different roles operating on the same global stage. The Pope speaks to universal moral principles like human dignity, migration, global responsibility, whereas the U.S. president, by contrast, is accountable to the voters. Domestically, he's focused on national security, economics, domestic priorities, border issues. So the perspectives don't line up, and historically, they rarely have. From a national security lens, there are really three drivers behind these kind of tensions. The first driver, sovereignty versus universality. The nation state versus global moral institution. Second is security versus morality, how leaders balance border control, stability, and risk against humanitarian concerns. And the third is domestic politics versus global messaging, what resonates at home versus what resonates internationally. So a key point here is that moments like this don't signal a breakdown. They're part of a long-standing and often constructive dynamic between two enduring forms of leadership. The Vatican, like Les said, has been around for 2,000 years. It's not going anywhere, and neither is the nation-state system. The dialogue and occasionally the disagreement come with the territory. So in that sense, what we're seeing today fits squarely within a historical pattern that's not outside it, even if the modern media environment and immediacy of today's communications can make these differences appear sharper and more visible than they were in the past. Like, so, there was no Twitter around in 1072. If there was, who knows if we'd even be here. And so that's my take on it, Les.
Jones, what's your take here? Do you agree with Marc? This is kind of a natural thing that happens. Heads of state versus religious leaders. They're going to be coming from different perspectives, which is probably a very good thing if you look at it from a certain perspective. Or is this something, if you will, more profane and specific about the Iran war and American domestic politics? What's your take?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like Marc said, there's no surprise that there are moments throughout history where the Vatican and the head of the Vatican may disagree with certain political leaders. You even can take U.S. history from the Vietnam War, like foreign policy issues from the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, under different presidents, to domestic issues, abortion. There is deltas between American political leaders and the Pope. But what we have now, I don't think, the president's response, I don't think it's amplified by Twitter. I think his response is unique when it comes to American political leaders in the past. When we talk about the president here, we talk about kind of some of his bombastic, statements so that he can strengthen his position at a negotiating table. So it kind of makes me laugh because I'm like, what negotiating table is he at right now with the Pope, right? I think he might have heard the Pope was elected and he thinks that somehow the Pope also has an audience he's trying to win over and there's some kind of like polling on him, but they're like operating in two completely different realms, right? The president has the midterms. He's got maybe Congress on his mind. That's a question mark, but the Pope isn't answerable to anyone, right? I mean, I guess God, eternity, but very different from the president. So the Pope is not running for office. He is speaking, to human dignity and moral wars and the like. And that really gives the Pope an opportunity to criticize or to make statements without trying to get something in return, right? He's not jockeying for position or to win over more followers when he speaks. He's speaking honestly. And so I think it's hard to imagine how the president thinks he's going to win against the Pope, right? He always talks about winning and coming out with the best deal, but I'm not really sure what he's leveraging for right now.
All right. I have
Chicago's coming. The Chicago from Les is coming.
I have a slightly different take here. First of all, Pope can say whatever the Pope wants, and good for the Pope, and that's his role, and he should be having a different focus on things, and that's all terrific. I do think it would be nice to see the Pope kind of address all of the issues. If he's gonna pick out a few, try to address a broader range, including the way the Iranian government treated its own citizens just a few months ago when they were protesting against the dictatorial nature of the regime. I don't think there were any remarks from the Vatican on that. It would have been nice to see them be a little more aggressive on the human rights front. And I do think it's interesting, and I don't know exactly what happened, but I do think it's interesting that David Axelrod, who is and was and remains the chief consigliere to former President Barack Obama, went to visit the Pope a few weeks ago. And if there was some sort of conversation about the role of the Pope and what he can say on these international policy matters, then this could be one of the examples of epic trolling, one of the most amazing examples of epic trolling I've ever seen. Trolling. And kind of inducing a little. Is
that the South Side coming out in him, Les?
Yeah, a little kerfuffle here. We are talking about a political master strategist at work who cannot restrain himself. And then I also kind of wonder, there's also talk of Obama going to see the Pope. Barack Obama also has ties to the South Side of Chicago. He's not actually from there. I believe he was born in Hawaii. He kind of made the South Side his adopted home. Claims to be a White Sox fan. I'm a little skeptical about that. And trying to put.
But didn't Vice President Vance also visit the Pope? So.
Well, he's the Vice President of the United States, and he's Catholic. Neither Axelrod nor Obama are Catholic, to my knowledge, so they're not adherents to the faith. So there is this kind of other narrative going on, and former President Obama is about to open his presidential center on the South Side of Chicago on June 19th of this year.
I didn't know it was this year.
And maybe he was looking for the pontiff to come and kind of bless the new wonderful building that they've built on the shores of Lake Michigan there on the South Side that everyone loves so much. So there's a whole lot of churn going on behind the scenes, folks, and I think we're I think we should all kind of look at this with a little bit of a jaundiced eye and realize that there are agendas here.
What do you take about some of the stories on it that say because it's an American book? It is strange when you hear him speak, right? The Pope speak. It's in English, right? You're used to that not being the case. Do you buy some of the arguments that what he says now carries a different weight, at least for us here, when he speaks on issues that intersect with American, foreign policy or domestic issues?
Because 100%. And I think it's terrific. And my wife and I were in Rome last year, and we were trying to buy, some bling for the new Pope. And the only thing we would get were coffee mugs that said Cafe Americano with a picture of the Pope on, which was all right. Sorry. I hope we're making this a fun Friday episode about what is, in fact, a very serious topic, but very interesting politics, very interesting foreign policy implications. Catholic Church, of course, is universal. It is global. It is involved in a lot of issues that don't necessarily touch on the actual interests of the United States government. It is, in theory, focused on a higher plane and the fate of our immortal souls and all of that great stuff. But it does every once in a while, we all live in this world. It comes down to the things that we're talking about with respect to U.S. policy towards Iran, the politics behind it, and how the U.S. is positioning itself. And what the latest events on the Strait of Hormuz will be, which I assume we're going to be talking about on Monday. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks always to Grace Trice, Claude Jennings, the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Monday, April 20th, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.